Welcome, welcome. We've still got a couple of people joining. We'll probably give it one more minute and then we'll get going. I'm going to go ahead and start introducing myself because if people don't hear that, that is okay. I am Rachel Phillips. I lead up measurement and evaluation for OER Project, but I also have over the years worked a lot on our content, and right now I'm working a lot with professional development and I do lots of different stuff. I was a second grade teacher, and then I taught secondary ELA in juvenile hall schools for a while. And then I say this not jokingly at all. I took the easy way out and I went and got my doctorate and was really interested in studying how people learn and how students learn and how teachers learn. And so I think teaching, being in the classroom is the hardest job in the world. I've never been as tired as I was. And so I appreciate you all so much for what you do. And I appreciate you taking some after school time or some rain day time or whatever it might be. Maybe some of you are on spring break to be here with us today. I know the session was advertised as an hour and a half. We're actually going to try to keep it to an hour if we can. We might go a little bit over. We will stay at the end for questions. But I hate asking people to kind of sit through 90 minutes at the end of the school day. I think it's a lot. So anyway, thanks for being here. Don't hesitate to unmute, ask questions. We have people keeping an eye on the chat. We want to make this as interactive as we can. And so here we go. So today our topic, as you all I'm sure are aware, is assessment. So as we're still gathering together, we're going to pop up a Zoom poll for everybody. And we'd love to know what grade levels you teach, how long you've been teaching, and generally, how confident do you feel about your assessment practices? Gives me a good sense of who's here today, and we want to tailor the session accordingly to make sure we're doing this. And so, we've got some very confident folks. Can everybody else see the results of the poll, or am I the only one who gets to see that?
I mean, I can see them, Rachel, but I think maybe
I know you can see them. Hey, Laura, can you see the results of the poll?
No, where are they? In the chat?
No. Okay, I just see the only people who can see them. So anyway, a poll with everybody because this is kind of fun. So we are 75% high school teachers in our room. I just want everybody to kind of have a sense of who's in the room. We're about 75% high school, about and then we've got 33% middle school, which I think there's folks who teach both middle and high here. So welcome. We have teachers. We've got 40% of folks are in their first 5 years of teaching. Welcome. 18% in their 5 to 10 years, and we've got some real veteran teachers. 43% of the room has been teaching for more than 10 years. So we're going to be looking to everybody to hear about all your assessment practices, but there's some great wisdom in the room. So exciting. We are almost evenly split between confidence with assessment and not confidence with assessment. And so, we've got 14% feels very confident. So I guess that's why everyone's here. And most people are somewhat confident. So kind of give you a sense of the room and who's here and all of that. So that's what we've got. So now you know who else is here, and we'll be talking with everyone. So just as a quick do now, as we start digging in, if you feel like it, if rubrics had a sticker warning, what cautionary words would you use to ensure teachers don't misuse or misinterpret them? So feel free to drop something into the chat for that. You also don't have to if you don't feel like it, but that is optional. I'll leave that up just for a moment. And then moving right along. So we try to have some norms. We really think of skills clinics as more of a workshop. Use with caution. Thank you. Results not typical. Love it. You can pay attention to the chat, but we'd love to have your cameras on if you're willing. We really think of skills clinics more as a workshop, and you're going to go into breakout rooms, and we're going to ask you to kind of practice some things. We're going to give you some time for sort of, talking about how would you use assessment in your own classroom. So, and we're totally okay. We welcome pets, we welcome kids, we welcome car rides, whatever you need to do that, but love to see faces when we can. If you have thoughts, if you have reactions, we've got you can use your emoji reactions. Those are kind of down at the bottom of your screen. And I think there's a label that says, I think if you go to more, you might get reactions, but if you scroll down to the bottom, you'll be able to find your reactions. You don't have to do that, but if you want to, yeah, good, bad, or ugly, I'm up for all kinds of reactions. Feel free to ask questions. Yep, totally fine to be in a meeting. It's, everybody's busy, lots going on. Appreciate you being here. You come first, your family comes first, any of that. Students come first. And this is your time. So please ask your questions, and here we go. So our agenda for today. So we just kind of we're doing our overview now. Kind of want to hear about your approach to assessment. That gives us a good grounding on, let's maybe not talk about the things people feel really familiar with. We are going to evaluate an assignment using an OER project, what we call feedback form. This is going to be an assignment related to causation. So you'll see what we call our causation tool and a feedback form. And we're going to talk a lot probably about formative assessment, which is something that we really encourage. We are going to then talk about different assessment methods that you find in OER project materials. You don't necessarily have to teach OER projects to use these things. Some of them are ideas that can be used in different curriculum. So if you use our stuff, great. If you don't use our stuff, great. Hopefully you'll walk away with some good ideas, and hopefully you'll share some of your good ideas with us. So you can see on the slides our objectives. I'm curious if anybody is coming in with kind of a specific agenda in mind. Is there something you're puzzling over? Is there a specific outcome or skill that you are hoping to get out of the session? If so, you're welcome to unmute yourself and share. You're welcome to drop it in the chat. But we want to make sure that you are taking your own free time to come here, and I hope that you'll walk away with something that you feel is valuable that you can use with your students. So if you have any requests, throw them in. That can be now, that can be later, and we will do our best to address those things in this session. So we also have, as part of our sessions, we are going to share, I think, a link to sort of a PDF that kind of has what I like to call the run of show. So if you have to walk away for a second and come back, you can be like, oh, here's where we are. Or I am guilty of not listening to breakout room directions. And then I get into the breakout room and I'm like, what are we supposed to be doing here? And so we're providing a sheet that will kind of orient you if you're like, oh, I spaced out for a minute. So don't worry about it if you do. And if you do, you can do not hesitate to say, hey, what are we doing? I spaced out, or I had to take a call, or whatever. So any questions before we move on, or is there any burning thing that somebody was thinking like, I'm really here for this, let's make sure we cover it? Simple assessment tools, awesome. We've got some of those, like we're going to talk a little bit about quick assessment. Awesome, fantastic. All right, I love it. So we will get to that. And then simple general assessments. All right, we're headed in the right direction then. That's great. And we also have a couple of folks who are teachers who are very, very familiar with OER projects. So they're going to spend a little time talking about their approaches, and they are some amazing, I'm sure everyone is an amazing teacher in this room, but we've got some that are going to share some of their personal experiences using some of the tools we'll talk about today. So, let's take a minute to just reflect for a second on what you do in the classroom. So curious to know, formative and cumulative assessments. All right, welcome. We love new teachers. Easy to implement that aren't multiple choice. Yes, I am not a big fan of those. I was never good at them. So we don't really do any of that in the OER project. So your approach to assessment. So if you can, share in the chat, but one of the things we want to think about is, how do you approach assessment in your classroom? What tools do you routinely use? How do you gauge student success? And how do you involve students in the assessment process? So one of the things that we know about learning is you don't learn without feedback. And you don't learn if you're not in charge of your learning. So you might learn a little bit, but sort of this idea of metacognition and thinking about your thinking is something we really want to encourage students to do. This is for a couple reasons. One, it helps them learn. Two, if they know what's up, your life's a lot easier. As opposed to constantly having to tell them, this is where you are, this is what you're doing. They should really know where they are. So really like to think a lot about how do you get students involved and students invested in their own learning, which is not always easy. But I do want to ask a couple of folks in the room. So both Megan, who's under the name OER Project Events right now, and Tyrone are here. And whichever one of you, I'd love you to unmute and talk about kind of your approach to assessment in the classroom.
Yeah,
Thanks,
I'd
Tyrone.
love to jump in, Rachel. One of my things is I'm very big on using a rubric, but the impediment with that is students need to understand that rubric. And so I do a lot of upfront work at the beginning of the school year, going over the rubric with students. Okay, so what does this mean? So if it says like, particularly my AP World students, what does this mean for you to have a certain amount of documents? How will you know this? And then I show them some exemplars as well that match the rubric. So I'll be like, okay, so here's an exemplar of a student who, like, went above and beyond, are just meeting, not quite meeting it, and give them those examples, non-examples as well. And so they have a really good grasp on the rubric, and that helps me out later on when I'm just using the rubric to grade. And it serves as better feedback that way than just like, oh, well, I looked at the rubric, I don't really know what this means, I don't know what I'm looking for here. And they can go back and reference those exemplars as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I used to sometimes have students rewrite the rubric in their own words, um, and then kind of check for their understanding, and then we would work on it, and then they could have that as a reference. So I love that.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
that was one of the things I was also going to say. Having students rewrite that rubric in their own words. I also use rubrics for literally every graded assignment and ungraded. And I think that that's another aspect to my assessment approach is not everything gets a grade in the grade book, but everything gets feedback. So that students can see, like, I can assess something and not put it in the grade book. It's just informing my instruction. So also having students reflect, right? Like, what did they do well? What didn't they do well? How can they improve so that they can grasp the skills that I'm asking them to grasp.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Does anybody else have any like something tried and true that they're like, this is something like I'm gonna teach, even if you're new to the classroom, if you've been around the classroom forever, do you have anything if you don't grade it, they won't do it? Yeah, I think that's really common. But does anybody have anything that they're like, I just love doing this practice. It works. I use it. Maybe it's easy, maybe it's not.
This is something I tried this week that worked. This week and last week, I started like from the last day's lesson for the bell ringer. I just got to put the question on the board related to the material from yesterday and then just put it on an index card. Because I normally do bell ringers for a full week, but just put it on an index card. I can immediately see what it is, if they got it or not.
Nice. And then it bridges, sort of activates the prior knowledge and probably bridges those days. That's nice, and that's a pretty low lift. You just have to have an index card, or I'm sure there's other ways you can do it. Fantastic. All right. So we're actually going to dive right in to evaluating assignments. I'm definitely I kind of do presentations in a way where I want to do things and then talk about the things we do. So we might spark some more ideas about different ways of assessment. But this is going this is an assignment about causation. And this is from the Big History Project, if you're familiar with that. It's the history of the world from the Big Bang to today. And this is from Big History Unit 8. It's about the Columbian Exchange. Some of you might be, if you are world history teachers, you might be in the Columbian Exchange right now. You might be past it. I don't know. It's always hard to get everybody's periodization down. This is the final activity in what we call our causation progression. And I'll talk a little bit more about progression, but these are kind of, they relate to historical thinking skills or historical thinking practices. And they kind of are a release of scaffolding throughout the year. It's kind of, you revisit the same ideas over and over and over again. And we provide what's called a tool, which is a kind of just a graphic organizer to help students understand what they need to kind of pick out of something about causes and consequences. And then alongside those, we have what we call a feedback form. The feedback form, you might go, well, that's a rubric. We call it a feedback form because we don't feel like we're in the business of grading anybody else's students. That's for you to decide. So we try to give a framework of here's ways you can evaluate. One thing that we like to think a lot about is that rubrics and feedback forms sometimes are difficult in that, like, if you think about a comprehensive rubric, students may not meet all the criteria in that comprehensive rubric because as a teacher, you might not actually be giving them an assignment where they're asked to do all those things. So if you're only asking them to find causes of an event, why you're not going to evaluate the consequences of the event. And so I think that's something that I probably did in my own practice was like, here's a writing rubric. And it's like, well, all I did was ask you to write a paragraph. How can I ask maybe about audience or voice or things like that? And so I think really thinking about when you have a rubric, sometimes maybe you can just take a chunk of it and use it to evaluate rather than trying to do a large comprehensive evaluation. Another thing that I used to do a lot is like, oh, okay, we're just going to focus on like making a claim here. And that's really all we're doing, rather than I'm going to try to do all these other things. So sometimes too, you want to just pick and choose what you're evaluating. So moving back into this. So we're going to put you into a couple of breakout rooms. And as I said, it's about the Columbian Exchange. And, you know, in this activity, students practice analyzing the causes and effects of the Columbian Exchange by time, role, and place. And then they evaluate the most historically significant effects of the Columbian Exchange. And then this actual activity, they create a mini book because it's kind of a culminating activity, but we're going to kind of move away from that. So you're going to use that link, which may need to be dropped into the chat again. I'm not sure if I think some folks have come in since we started. So if we can post the Google form link again. People in even numbered rooms are going to look at it as a group, use the feedback form to try to evaluate the second assignment. People in odd number rooms will try to evaluate the first assignment. You're going to have about 10 minutes. Talk about it together. If you have time to look at the second one, do it. One is an example of probably a stronger student, and one is probably an example of a not as strong student. And I want you to look at that feedback form and try to evaluate and really think about that feedback form in terms of how does it work? How would you maybe change it to work with your students? Have that conversation. And during your breakout rooms, we want you to focus on these three questions. So how effective do you find the feedback form in facilitating feedback to students? Do you think it's clear and understandable? And does the feedback form encourage students to reflect on their work and engage in self-assessment? So we'll give you about 10 minutes in those rooms. And then make sure there's someone there who's willing to kind of share out, because we will do a share out at the end. Now, I think that when we create curriculum for everyone, we don't create it for any one person. And so I would imagine that most folks will have, oh, you should change it this way, you should do it that way. That's awesome. That's the goal here, is thinking about how could you take this and use this with your students. So I believe that Megan has created breakout rooms for us. And so you will join those, and then we'll bring y'all back in about 10 minutes. We will give you a 2-minute warning, so you know that it's kind of time to start wrapping up. Any questions? No? Okay. And if questions come up, you can write them. We'll see them.
I just need to apologize. I'm in safe driving mode as I shuttle my kids from lacrosse to ice hockey.
Do you want us to keep you in the main room for now, or do you want us to put you in a breakout?
I can't really, I can't see any of the materials from my phone. So
okay. Okay. Yeah, if you just hang out. Yeah.
Okay.
Do whatever's best for you. Just do whatever's safest, please. Just do sucked back in. All right. Welcome back, everyone. So we're going to go ahead. I think everybody's back. All right. So we want to go ahead and do the share out of the assignment. I'm actually going to go back and leave this up if anybody wants the guidance for what you talked about. if your conversation went in a different direction, that's totally fine. If you went in a different direction, but you still talked about assessment, we'd love to hear what you talked about. So again, anybody willing to go first, unmute and let us know what your room discussed.
I'll go first. I
Thank
was in
you.
room 5, and overall we thought it was a really effective form. What we noticed was it is very clear and concise. You just go down, check what they're missing, which is great for students because students, like when you're doing a really deep analysis, students tend to kind of gloss over that, and they just want to get to the meat of what they're missing. And I like how at the bottom there's notes, so you can expand on it, but right, front and center is clear and concise what they want. And then as far as self-reflection, we thought that perhaps like self-reflection would be a little difficult for students on this, but we thought this form would be a really great peer feedback activity.
Ah, love that. Thank you. Outstanding. All right. Anybody else want to go? Thanks. Yeah. Sasha.
So we
Mike,
talked about the fact that the tool has, or the feedback form has areas for notes. And like in my particular case, I would be writing in guiding questions to get them thinking a little deeper, because what we noticed, it's very much so light on description and analysis. So what questions can I add in that notes to actually elicit some deeper thinking?
that's such a good idea. All right. Any other brilliant ideas? I love it.
I guess I can go
Thank you.
for my group. So we sort of looked at I think we talked a lot about overall how overwhelming, rubrics can be to some students. It's like this is a lot of things. I'm looking at a lot of things. I don't necessarily understand all of what this means, and so explaining it and focusing maybe on one thing over, the whole thing. Across the course of the year, maybe, okay, like this part of the year, we're going to focus on this thing. And then, adding and modeling in class kind of what we're looking for a little bit more to sort of help, again, just like with guiding questions, I think, have them really understand kind of it's not this happened and then this happened, and it's more the connection making piece that we're looking for. It's like, come on guys, you got this, and sort of helping support them in getting to that conclusion. So modeling, breaking it down, all that lovely thing. Scaffolding, we love that word.
We do. We really do. Yeah. Somebody, I don't know if you guys have all heard of Professor Bob Bain. We kind of think of it the OER project. He's kind of like he's like the godfather of the OER project. And he always does talk about those. You don't eventually take down scaffolding, it becomes a cage. So I always like to think about that too, and where you can kind of go with that. But one of the things we do with those forms that you see is if it wasn't the end of the school year and it was the beginning and we gave you a beginning assignment, a lot of that form would be grayed out, so that students are kind of just focusing on a little bit of it. So, and you can do that obviously you can do that yourselves anytime with any part of it. So, other groups.
Rachel, one of the things that we were talking about in our group was like how to get students to make the most out of the feedback form. And so to show them what to do with that feedback, how to use it, and what that feedback is commented on. And so I think that's also like a step that has to be taken in using the feedback form as well.
I love that. Yeah, I think, I mean, and I did this myself, but if somebody gives me feedback and I don't have a next step or I don't know what to do with it, I don't bother, right? And so I almost tend, when I teach, to do they don't get nearly as much feedback on the final as they do on like a draft. And then I will also grade students on how they responded to feedback. And that's actually how I do peer feedback. And it's a little bit of a tricky puzzle, but if one student, I have one student give another student feedback, and how a student responds to that feedback is part of their grade, you know, unless they didn't get much feedback. But that loop is so important. That's where you learn. The final thing doesn't have as much learning, because they're like, well, that's done, it's over, it doesn't matter. Although, I think I will also grade along the way, because as some of you wrote earlier, if it's not a grade, they're not going to do it. So, all right. Anybody else want to share? Did anyone find the tool or the rubric problematic? Oh, go ahead, John. Sorry.
About the idea of getting feedback. One of the things I imagine doing with this student, as I imagine him or her, is to actually talk with them about, like, sit down and have a conversation with them about what they were intending and what they meant by some of the statements, and as a way of kind of helping them expand on their analysis, because I see this also as a step towards, like, applying that skill in an essay, for example. So, kind of helping them, move forward, having that conversation with them might give them, help them reflect and give them the next step as well. Right. So that was all.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. I think
Rachel,
yeah.
Sorry, Rachel, just to add something to what John said, right? It's like what you'd mentioned before about at the beginning of the school year, most of this would be grayed out, right? Because like at the beginning of the school year, we're just identifying causes or just identifying effects, right? And then now we want students to describe. So then we'll, open that one up, and doing it that way too, get students to understand those concrete examples for them to be able to, like, okay, I know I was able to identify, I know I was able to describe, and now I can do like some sort of analysis of this as you move forward.
Got it. That's great. Thank you. And then Cheyenne, I noticed apologies if I pronounced your name incorrectly. Okay. So you guys talked about the legend and role and type. So role and type was missing from, like, your student didn't do it. And were you in an even or an odd room? It doesn't matter actually, because I'm gonna forget if you had the good example or the bad example. Oh,
we
you
had
were
the bad
odd.
example. Yeah.
You had the bad
example, and they did have it. So because there was a little confusion between our group, like, was that supposed to be done on the graphic organizer? So we were also having an issue with it, but with it being down at the bottom, I think by the time the students filled out the graphic organizer, they kind of moved on and they didn't see that part. But even though it's clearly listed in the above instructions, you kind of got to put like things together, it seems like, especially with my students anyways.
No one reads instructions.
No,
absolutely
apparently
no one.
We don't either. So
yeah, no one does. I've included. Yes, exactly. So yeah, okay, that's
Ask
a great
anybody
note.
who works in a museum. Nobody reads descriptions.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah, absolutely not. Unless confused, and then maybe they will start reading. Yeah, there you go. All right, fantastic. Any last words before we move on? Because we're gonna get back into some rooms. Love everybody's idea. Thank you for being willing to share. Okay, that's our evaluate. Okay. So I'm gonna give you a little spiel on OER's approach to assessment. I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's very clear that I think we're going to learn a lot more from each other than you're probably going to learn from me. So I'm going to go kind of quickly here. But essentially, we really value formative assessment, or what we call informative assessment. And people do come look at our stuff, and sometimes people are frustrated because they're like, you don't have multiple choice, which I know somebody said they don't want, or you don't have enough, like, or quizzes or things like that. And we do have a lot in our curriculum that we really think is incremental assessment that you use throughout. And so we have what we call openers and closers in a lot of activities and lessons. And openers are meant to kind of be that baseline overall understanding. How are kids doing here? And closers are meant to be quick little, activities like an exit ticket or things like that. And, we do that for a bunch of reasons. One is, there's this idea of like, sometimes you want to be a little stealthy with your assessment. Like you really do want to just check for understanding, and get an idea of where your kids are, without causing anxiety, without it being a huge deal. Just where are you? And again, it's kind of reinforcing and making them responsible for where am I? And so fostering and putting it in the kids' hands as much as you can is what we really like to think about. And that's kind of why we do the feedback forms and things like that. Like, where are you? How are you doing? We also value multiple pathways to success. So like I was pretty good at school, but I was not good at multiple choice and I was not good at short answer. Like I went and interpreted them, and I bet everybody here has a different thing they're good at. And so always being faced with the same kind of assessment too, I think is really hard on kids, and it doesn't differentiate. And it's sort of like, not everybody's going to do really well on an AP test. Not everybody's going to do really well on the ACT or the SAT or whatever it might be. And so providing a lot of different opportunities and different pathways to success, I think, is really important when you can do it. So that's really what we encourage. And, effective assessment improves learning outcomes, collaboration, engagement, motivation, gets kids to self-regulate their learning. So there's loads of research about it, but I think put really, really simply is, again, we just need feedback to learn. And without feedback, you're not going to learn because you're just going to be going wherever. And so there's all kinds of grain sizes of feedback. There's little bits, there's large bits. You can do it for yourself, you can do it for somebody else. So that's kind of how we do it. So some of the ways, some of the things that might not look like assessment if you do use OER project materials really are meant to be assessment. So we have something called the DQ notebook or the UP notebook. So in big history, it's the driving question. And in the world history, it's the unit problem notebook. And it kind of early, and I'll say like, kind of just, what do you know about this thing? And kids write whatever they want. And then later in a unit, you check in and say, well, what do you know about this thing now? And how has your thinking changed? And it's really simple. It can take a really short amount of time. And it's really more for them. That's really more self-assessment because you do it on the same sheet of paper. And it's like, oh, look, my thinking has changed about that. That's self-feedback. That's self-assessment. Somebody already mentioned peer review. Discussion is a great way to assess where kids are. Like you throw out a question and nobody can answer it. Well, some of it might be that they're shy and you need to kind of like early in the year, but like if kids really can't talk about stuff, and I really mean discussion, I don't mean like call and response. Like, your kids, here's a central historical question, talk about it for 10 minutes. I'm going to sit back. Presentations are a great way for students to show their thinking. And I think those are great. We have a lot of different presentation types. Like maybe you're going to do a poster, maybe you're going to make an influencer campaign, maybe you're going to do whatever, a video. And that kind of lines up with multiple pathways to success of giving your kids a lot of different options and ways to show their understanding. For those, when I need like a rubric, we'll generally in OER, but we'll have what we call a checklist. And so there's certain things that even if somebody is like, I'm going to do a video, I'm going to do a poster, I'm going to do a PowerPoint, there's certain elements that can go across all of those, right? You need a claim, you need to support your claim with evidence, you need to do all these other things. And then other things can get creative. And that's a way to kind of, I think, evaluate fairly across different kinds of ways to show your thinking. I mentioned our closing activities. Those come usually at the end of lessons, and those are meant to be really like a capstone for an overall lesson or unit. And then we do have formal writing assessments. So we have the traditional DBQ, which are in a lot of ways modeled off what AP does. We have long essay questions. We do have some sort of research paper. So there's a couple folks, Megan, Tyrone, what are the things in OER project that you kind of stick to for assessment?
I love the DQ notebook, unit problem notebook for that reflection piece. It's usually, I know like if you're looking at the lesson plan in on the website. It's not the very first assignment, but I make it the very first thing that they do when we start a unit, because I want to really catch what they know or might know about something before we start doing any of the videos or articles. And then it is the very last thing that they'll do. And I love to see their growth and how, you know, that like aha moment, like, oh, I actually did learn something. So I think that that's great. And then I mean, I love to have them write. So a DBQ and any type of writing, formal writing is fun for me, not for them.
So I'd say for me, it's like two-part. It's the discussion piece, because I love going through whenever we use one of the, you know, OER texts and we do the close read protocol, going through those questions, checking for understanding, you know, then we're going to do part 2 now. Let's actually use that to do some skills work. And now we're going to be doing writing, and writing, the formal writing process for me isn't always like a full, you know, essay. Sometimes we're just going to be working on making claims of causation, making claims of, you know, CCOT at this time. And then now we're going to be making claims and we're going to be supporting it with evidence, right? And so just getting them in that like mode of like, what is it that I need to do at this time when I'm given this prompt, and step by step. So with that, I love to use those, you know, tools that are in there, like the DBQ tool, the causation tool, you know, comparison tool. Any of these tools like are really great for setting students up for success on assessment.
That's right. And I think Tyrone, you had mentioned to me at one point, we have something called the question parsing tool, which I actually really love and I think is a great one for like, I don't know how to read directions, or I don't know what this thing is asking me. Because I still have trouble with like, to what extent does XYZ, like what does that mean? And so we have a tool that is like helps kids like break down understanding what in the world this question is even asking. Because if they don't know what it's asking, the things they answer are always pretty interesting. So
yeah, and that's really great too, to help them like, you know, restate the question, like what's the time period, what's the skill you're doing here, and so to get them like, and after a while they don't even really need the tool because they can just do it, you know, from memory, but like starting them off with it is great.
Yeah, and if you're interested in any of those tools and don't know where to find them, if where the participant link sheet is, we link to what is a section of the site called teacher resources. And there's a section I think called tools and rubrics maybe, or something along that line. And you can find all of those there and you can download them or put them into your Google Classroom and use them for however you need to change them for your students. So, all right, awesome. Thank you. So yeah, so lots of ways to assess. I really encourage the easy assessment. There's a lot of bang for your buck in those, and it does not always have to be a formal portrait experience because you don't have time for any of that. And I know sometimes your administrators in your schools want that to happen, but if you can just take those little moments in time, the exit cards, any of that, highly encourage it. Okay, so thank you, Tyron. That was a really nice transition to so in all of our courses we have what we call practice progressions. I mentioned these earlier, and we have them for a lot of historical thinking practices. And again, if you go to that teacher resources page, you can find all of the progressions, and all of these have a tool and they all have a feedback form. So kind of similar to what you've seen. Some of them, they don't all work the same. They're not all a graphic organizer. Like our CCOT is a graphing activity. Like what were the continuities? What were the changes? What were positive? What were negative? Contextualization is actually is another activity where you kind of put things on a funnel. So contextualization is so hard. So near context and far context. And all of those kids doing those over the year, if you go through progressions or even just a few activities in them, you can see them improving. Like, are they able to fill out more of the tool? Are they maybe they get to roll and type, or maybe they keep missing it, or all of that. So if you go to teacher resources, there's one of these for each course, and it's handy because they all hyperlink, so you can go right to those activities. And you can find the relevant placemat. We also have like activities placemats and other things, so you can you can find some of the openers and the closers and the fun things. And so you've already seen this. So here's the causation tool, and here's the causation feedback form. And as I did mention early in the school year, we would never, we personally, you might have some really advanced kids, but really may only do a couple of causes or a couple of facts, and not an extended analysis of anything. Historical accuracy doesn't really change, and historical significance doesn't really change because it's accurate or it's not. And I mean, I guess significance can be. There's definitely some more opinion there, or bias, or positionality. So we have those throughout. So what we're going to go in, and I think we'll do this one pretty quickly because we don't have tons of time, but maybe we'll just take and go for 5 minutes. And I want you to look again, at that feedback form. And some of you talked about like, yeah, I think this would be clear. And other people are like, I'm not sure my, students feel this, or the idea of the guiding question. And so love for you to go into the room and think about like, how would you really tailor this for your kids? Like, how would you come up with stuff? Because again, like we're not going to assign numbers to these. So like, how might you do that for the person who's like, I've got to have a grade? What's your solve there? How might you modify it? How might you explain it to your students? So really thinking about like, okay, next week I'm going in, I might give them this tool. I want you to think about like, give you a little time to reflect, because I think I often walk away from a session, I'm like, that was cool, and I don't think about the connection to my classroom and my practice. So we just want to give you a few minutes to do that with each other. So we're all just going to go back into rooms. Again, if there's somebody who's willing to do a little stare out at the end, we'll do that for about 5 minutes. We'll come back together and we'll take any final questions and we'll close out. Anybody, yeah. So into rooms you go. Thank you. All right. I think we're all back. So any great modification ideas or anything you want to add? I know we did a little bit of that before, but I'm thinking after a little time to reflect maybe, or a little time to chat with one another.
Yeah, we were talking about the possibility to adapt this rubric. For example, when it's something short, not a paper or a more in-depth analysis, but sometimes you assign a reading and then you discuss the reading in class and you want to provide feedback. It would be impossible for me to do it with every student, but maybe I can take a sample, or I can choose a couple of students and provide feedback in this way, or maybe doing orally. I mean, I'm thinking in terms of the daily class, not something that is written, that can give them some concrete, feedback, that's the word, of their presentations, of their interventions in class. I'm trying to think, how can I apply this on a daily basis, not for big projects?
I love that. So sort of a spot checking.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and I think the elementary teacher in me would probably do something like, I'd probably keep a list of names and like check off who I spot check, so I don't always ask the same kid. I used to do popsicle sticks, but you probably don't need that anymore. AI can probably help. Using at the beginning of a larger project, I love that. Check for broader historical thinking. Yep, that one's always really hard. What else?
I wanted to share something that Eric said in my group that I really, really appreciated, which was the idea of sitting the class down and all the students down with it and having them identify and set goals, and realizing that you are not going to be doing extended analysis at the start and at the beginning. If you are able to just identify historical causes, like that is success, and that their definition of success will evolve throughout the year as they and the class continue to grow. And I think that that's really cool, because sometimes showing someone the full spectrum and say, this is what we'll work towards eventually, is nice, but it can also be kind of intimidating if a student sees like, I can barely identify everything, and I know that these other students might be doing these other things. Telling them that not only is it okay, but it's far beyond expectation, and that you are going to grow, and so are your goals, and I think that's really cool.
That's outstanding. I love that. I feel like as grown-ups, we could probably take that to heart for ourselves as well, and sort of in our teaching process and all of that. I think it's so easy to look, and even in a room like this, like it's, there's people who've been teaching for a long time or in our community, and sometimes you see people who've been doing it, it's like, oh, it's intimidating, like I can't do that. But I think, yeah, those little breaking it down in those little pieces, I think that is very wise. So thank you, Eric and Jonas, for sharing that. All right.
I would say we talked about how to help students not be, and this is always a constant thing that I'm facing, like the fear of being wrong. I think sort of that growth mindset kind of goes into that of like, you're not going to be where everybody else is at the exact same time. Like we all kind of hit things at different points, but it's like, how do you uh, help encourage them to see the forest through the trees and be like, yeah, no, that was fine. Like you gave it an attempt. Like we're gonna go at it again. Like, sometimes I have students that are afraid to say anything because they're like, I'm gonna be wrong, or I'm gonna look stupid. Um, so I use a lot of discussion in my classroom. I only have about 8 kids in my US history class, which is I have a really small school. I have about 30 kids in my whole school. Uh, I know. Up here in the boonies, up here in Maine in the boonies. But no, I mean we just are really chill and it's really conversational. And we were talking about the 70s today, and somebody said, is that disco? Is that when disco is a thing? And I said, why, yes, it was, until rock and roll came along and said no more. But trying to be more like relaxed as much as you can be, I think helps. I have the advantage, and I realize that with 8 students. But yeah, I don't know. It's that fear of being wrong. We talked a lot about that, and how do you circumnavigate that so you're actually
Yeah.
assessing them accurately.
Yeah, and I do think that's a huge problem. And I think if you can create a culture where you celebrate failure, is actually kind of fantastic, because failure is where we grow, right? It's like a building character, but it's true, right? The hard things make you improve and learn. And so, I mean, even sort of like, oh, I said something out loud, maybe you get a high five. I don't know. But I think when people can create that culture, and even, I mean, especially, in the historical record, how many times do we have things that happen because somebody messed something up? And so I think that can be really fun to even find something like that and kind of celebrating that. So I think when, if anybody has good ideas of how to celebrate failure, please do share them. So with that, I'm just gonna we're gonna talk about, we have tips for success. I think you guys all know these, so we probably don't need much time here, but really communicating success criteria and expectations, self-assessment. I think it's also helped to, like what we're doing here is talk to some colleagues and be like, what are you doing? What am I doing? So trying to create spaces for that. Cheyenne, I love this. You mispronounce things frequently. So since I used to do a lot of misspellings on the board to see if you could catch me. And, yeah, love that. And then when we, opportunities for peer assessment, and then we said, multiple pathways to success. Success looks different for everybody. And I think holding those, I think there's a time and a place where our administrators and other people are like, we have this standardized thing that you have to do. And so I think when you don't have to do those things, it's really valuable to celebrate kids in different ways. I think every single kid does something well, and sometimes we just have to help point that out for them. And again, they're not going to be necessarily with somebody else's, but back to what was said, what Jonas was saying earlier, kind of every kid has their thing, and everybody has their goal, and everybody can improve in that way. And I think that's also the beauty of, like, that's a way we differentiate. And I think it's super duper important. So if you guys want to talk more about this, and I might, I'd say if somebody wants to go from the community, maybe Laura or Tyrone or Don or anybody, and start something about celebrating failure, I'd love to see that, in terms of how we assess, or anything else. You can pop over there. There's lots of conversations going on. You also don't have to go there for assessment. If you're looking for an idea for tomorrow or next week and you pop in there, there are people who will respond to you, I promise. And if not, you can send me a note. So that's our online teacher community. That's a good place to learn more. And so we are doing a session next month on differentiation, modification, and adaptation. So it'll be a similar format, lots of time to think about how to do those things in room. So if this was a format you liked, it'll be kind of like that. I don't think there's any better learning experience for me than learning from fellow teachers, and it's hard to get that time when you're in school. So trying to create those spaces for everybody to kind of talk to each other and learn from each other. So thank you so much for being here and spending your time with me. I'm going to stick around for a few minutes if anybody has any questions. Otherwise, have a great evening and thank you for doing what you do. Appreciate you all so much. You really do the hardest job in the world.